Welcome to the Empowered Podcast, episode number 82. I'm your host, Ellery Wells, and before we get started, I want to share a really cool concept and idea that I had with my mastermind this morning. As you know, if you've been listening to the show any amount of time, of course, we come out on Wednesdays, and Wednesday mornings, I have a 6 a.m. mastermind. Well, I am not a morning person generally, but I absolutely love and look forward to my 6 a.m. mastermind. I've been meeting with those guys for over a year now, and it has been an absolute blessing on my life. So James, Jimmy, Johnny, Randy, Donald, and Justin, thank you for being a blessing on my life. But here's what I want to share with you as you're listening to this. We've got a lot of people who are doing coaching, sales coaching, business coaching, those kinds of things in our mastermind group. And we had this really incredible discussion this morning. And here's the punchline of everything. If we realize that the people that we're coaching or teaching, you might be a teacher in a classroom or corporate or wherever, if we realize that the people that we are coaching and teaching aren't going to be our students forever, we can then transition into doing a better job helping those people, because we will soon realize that our best or worst business card will be the people that we're working with right now. We don't want them to be working with us forever. We don't want them to always need us. We want to, just like children, we want to raise them right, get them going in the right direction, and then release them. So if you're a teacher, if you're a coach, just really take that to heart. It's a change in mindset for me. Not that I wanted to be working with my coaching clients forever, but I never really put it in that light. I never really thought about them being the best or worst business card, or the example of what capabilities I have as the coach. I never thought of it that way before. So that's not necessarily related to the episode today. I hope you enjoy this chat that I'm about to share with you between me and one of my favorite bloggers out there, Jim Woods. Let's go right in. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Empowered Podcast. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with one of my favorite authors. I've been reading his blog for quite a long time, and he always has a unique perspective, valuable advice, and usually something that I can take away and either make a change in how I'm doing things or what I'm doing. So it's a pleasure to bring onto the show my friend, fellow author, fellow husband, fellow entrepreneur, Jim Woods. How you doing, Jim?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
You are very welcome. I'm excited to have you on the show. We had tried to do this. I don't know if you remember. We had tried to do this 7 or 8 months ago, maybe even more, and I think I dropped the ball. I don't think I got back to you, and I regretted it for a long time. And so when we were talking on Facebook just a couple weeks ago and you mentioned it, I was like, heck yeah.
Nice.
So I apologize for that.
No worries. No worries. You know, honestly, 8 months ago is such a blur to me because that is when I became a full-time entrepreneur. So it's all a blur to me. That feels like almost 8 years ago.
I know what you mean. I was thinking, well, just 20 minutes ago, literally, it's Friday now, which is, I think New Media Expo is over. I didn't go.
Right.
And I was thinking, man, it seems like it just started and I didn't even go. And I'm sure people who are there think it just went by in the blink of an eye.
Mm-hmm.
And just, I know you've partnered on a couple projects with Eric Fisher, and I want to talk about that. But he and I met officially last New Media Expo, and that seems like just yesterday almost. So you're right. Time flies, and then especially when you go gung ho into your own projects. I don't even know what word I was trying to say there. Your own product. Maybe that's what I was trying to say. it's just you lose time. You look up from your computer and it's 9 o'clock at night, and your wife's been sitting at home watching TV by herself. I don't know. Maybe that's just me, but
No, you're definitely absolutely right on the money there. And yeah, it's funny. I literally was on a coaching call. A couple of my friends, a couple of my coaches were out there in Vegas, and they're like, they're calling me from Vegas. It was like a surreal moment. I'm in Ohio, and they're calling me from Vegas, and we're all doing this, group coaching call, and they're telling me about it, and I'm just thinking, this is just so funny. And, technology has shifted everything. And now I'm able to talk to you. You're in Texas, right? Austin, I believe.
Yep.
Yeah. So and I'm like in mid Ohio near Columbus. So yeah, sometimes I just want to hit the pause button and reflect and say, wow, we can talk to people around the world. We can communicate with people all over the place. What's really holding us back here? And it's like I think sometimes it's almost like just our own fear and maybe some excuses, but I've heard Seth Godin say, here's a computer tied to everyone in the world. Here's your shot. What's stopping you? So yeah, this is fantastic. I'm so glad to finally connect with you here, Ellery.
Yeah, me too. And to your point, Jim, I've got a blog post formulating in my head that I want to submit to Inc. and Entrepreneur and some of those things.
Yeah.
About just like modern tools that allow you to take your business anywhere. And I'm sure that's kind of been done. But there's nothing new under the sun anyway, so why not do it, right?
I agree. And honestly, your take on it is going to be different from your perspective. So, even if it might resonate with some people, it might not, but that's everything we do, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one thing I talk to my mastermind groups about, my coaching clients about, is facing the imposter syndrome and how what am I reading? What's the I'm reading On Writing by Stephen King. I'm also reading The E-Myth Revisited, and it's in one of those where he's like, it's not what you do, it's how you do it, and how we do everything, how we see the world, how we write, how we talk, how we do podcasts or whatever. That's going to be unique from person to person. So we should do it anyway. So anyway,
absolutely. No, and I think that's a huge topic because I felt I used to live in Nashville. I spent almost 9 years in Nashville, which is like the blogging hub of the world. I mean, it's like everyone's from Nashville, and I'm very grateful, to have my time there. But when I resigned from my job and said, look, I'm going at this full bore, self-employed, I know I'm going to need to be closer to my family, to have that support network. And, just especially too for the kids, you need this as much stability as possible, especially when they're, in those transition times. And I think that it's been so refreshing for me to kind of be able to zig when I think others are zagging. And sometimes it's just in my own mind. It's almost like we set these limits or fences or, boundaries around ourselves. But I think there's so much of that imposter syndrome. And, I almost wonder, are we content curators or are we actual creators? Are we trying to get everyone to like us, or are we trying to do something kind of on our own? Because, I'm not saying you do it in isolation, but you can't, have the peanut gallery voting on everything you do. Otherwise, you just kind of paralyze yourself. So it's just been an amazing transition where I'm kind of like, I feel like in some ways I'm alone, but I'm not, because I'm still connected with all these great tools, that we're talking about. It's just almost like that change of scenery can absolutely, change your perspective is what I'm really getting at.
Exactly. And before we talk about the job transition, because I've been curious about that for a long time, if you're okay with talking about that. I was watching, I think I was catching up on some Shark Tank episodes, either that or a Last Man Standing or something. And something that one of these either actors or real people said is people are going to judge you either way. Whatever you do, if you give to the Red Cross, you're going to piss off somebody that wants you to donate to their charity. Or if you donate to your church and you don't donate to the bucket that they're passing around work, you're the only one on the team that didn't give. Whatever you do, you're going to piss off somebody. So why not do something that you want to do and and do something that's going to make you happy and could potentially lead to some really explosive results. That idea came to me last night, Jim, and I'm glad we have this opportunity to talk about it right now, because just, I don't know, and maybe that's where you were when you left your job. And again, I've been curious, so tell us what because my story is I got fired, and I hid that for a little bit, a while, and then I embraced it, and it worked out. What led you to saying peace out? I'm going back. I'm going back to Columbus.
Yeah. My story, I have to give the whole perspective. Like, it's my whole journey. I grew up in a very conservative, safe environment. Like, my dad was a governmental accountant, and I was literally like following in his footsteps. And the only real difference was I wanted to actually work for the FBI, but I never got on. My grades just weren't good enough, but I literally went into accounting, went down that, government route thinking, hey, I want to work for the FBI. And if you think about it, that's a huge dream. That is a really big, lofty goal. Well, I didn't get in, and I just, it was like, okay, closed door. Okay, I don't have a plan B. Oh, okay, I'll just take the path of least resistance. So that's what I did. And, you're really young, that college age right there. I was about 21, 22. And it's like, okay, well, I'll just take the path of least resistance. Okay, well, I was working at a government job during college, and I just stayed on that path. And over time, I just got a little bored with it, a little frustrated, not like angry or discontent, but just kind of like, I bet there's something more. Okay, well, all right, well, I'll just apply for some jobs. And I landed a job in Nashville, Tennessee. And now looking back, it's like that was just kind of almost my little attempt at kind of shaking things up. And I got married right then. I'm like 25, 26. And I got married, and when you get married, it's all about the relationship, growing closer with your spouse. And I kind of drifted along for a couple years there, and then we had our first child, a daughter, and drifting along there for a couple years. When my daughter turned 2, I just had a complete nervous breakdown, a complete meltdown. I really started to realize how much I hated my job, and I started to. It almost felt somewhat like a midlife crisis, but I was only like 30 at the time.
Was there an event, Jim, or was it a small things that had been building up, or what was that?
Small things building up in the background, and I just ignored them completely. When I was, before I moved to Nashville, I was in a band. This is before I got married. I was in a rock band and playing guitar, and I was doing that, but I never ever took on the responsibility or I don't want to say identity, but I never said, okay, I am creative. I never ever embraced it like fully. I just said, I practice, I dabble. And I almost just discredited any of my gifts. And I think that there's this underlying theme there where it's like a lot of us are afraid to say, I really enjoy doing this. This is something I love to do. And I think that's part of my problem, at least I'm sure it is for others too, where, it's dabbling, it's experimenting. It's not something where you're making this, full-time income. So therefore it's a hobby.
Well, what's interesting is you just gave me this idea when you were talking about this, Jim. Which, by the way, when the CIA came to Baylor, I was sold, man. I wanted the spy life, the James Bond,
Jack Bauer, Jack Ryan.
Yes,
yep.
I did not pursue that, but because I didn't know like 4 languages. Anyway,
and that's the one big thing too. Yeah, absolutely, you have to know those languages.
4 languages. Yeah, but it's all the things that would have made you weird in high school are the things that you should embrace and that we probably shun as we get older. Yeah. And then maybe we get to this point around the, late 20s, early 30s where we realize that stuff that we've kind of repressed over the last 10 to 12 years is really what we want to come back to. And I wasn't a writer. Right. I didn't do anything that I'm doing now then, but I just think of like, what if we had people who painted more or did more music, all the stuff that the quote cool kids, put you down for. in high school and middle school, because we've all been there. I was on a podcast with Melissa, can't remember her last name, about bullying, and all the stuff that we got made fun of is probably the stuff that would have made us millionaires if we'd stuck with it.
Maybe. Yeah, who knows?
I don't know, just a thought.
Or at least happier. Who cares about the money if you're that much happier? Because
that
you
is
know what I'm
true.
saying? I mean, you could be a millionaire, but you can absolutely hate your life. But if you can just find, those things that light you up, that make the time feel different. And I discovered that I was creative, essentially, after my little meltdown, breakdown. And I mean, I had all these health issues and I was just miserable. And I think the real catalyst for this was I kept applying for other government jobs, thinking, okay, well, this will take me to a new place. This new job will make me happy. But all I was doing was, shifting, on the same path. I was just trying to say, oh, well, if I stand over here, I'll be happier, versus I needed to be on a completely different path versus staying on that same road and, hopping instead of skipping. I mean, it's if you're on the wrong path and it's the wrong fit, you're not going to be happy. You're going to be very discontent. And I took a personality test. I never really embraced those. I don't know if I thought they were kind of mumbo jumbo or what have you. In my 20s, but I took one, and when I took it, it's like, it said I was an artist and I was super creative. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I was like almost in tears when I read the description. And I'm like, well, no wonder I'm doing exact opposite of this. When it said I was like an INFP, which is just the dreamer, the artist, is like what the summary of it is. I read that and I'm like, wow, that's me. Whoa. And that just, that started, continuing this chain reaction. And finally, over the course of that was about 4 years, from like 2011 through 2014, that I was just on the path towards self-employment. It was just a matter of when, not if. And I surrounded myself with some great folks in Nashville. And I think there's some truth to that. Who you hang around with, who inspires you, that's who you're going to become.
I think that, and I've talked about that several times on the show, on the blog. I just did 165 really cool lessons from Think and Grow Rich from Napoleon Hill, where he talked about that and the mastermind concept and all those things. That people who, I'm going to speak directly to the audience on this one. If you disagree that you are the average of the 5 people that you hang around with the most, you're wrong. I'll just put it out there, because the more, just like what you're saying, the more you hang out with people who are doing what you want to do and see the world the way that you want to see the world, not just talking right or wrong, but as a world of possibilities and collaboration instead of competition, your not only your perspective, but your reality will literally change, because you surround yourself with people who, instead of seeing, and this, it sounds, if you haven't experienced, Jim, and maybe you can bounce off of this a little bit, but if you haven't experienced this, it sounds weird.
It does.
It sounds hokey. It sounds like, but all of a sudden, if you started hanging out with people who played basketball after work every day, you would start wearing long shorts and get Nike Airs and wearing jerseys.
Absolutely.
Because it's what they do, and it's what your friends do.
And I think there's a challenge in this, Ellery. Specifically, I'm going to talk to the men. I think that guys, some of them, I mean, myself, I'm speaking mainly for myself, some of us just like to be alone. Some of us are introverts. Some of us, we have our close group of friends, and that's it. That's just how I'm wired. I have a few really, really close friends, and then it's like, okay, then I have a bunch of acquaintances. That's how I, grew up. That's how I'm wired. And I think some of us just, if you're that way, you're really, really, really limiting yourself. And I broke out of the mold, and I said, look, I'm going to start meeting people for lunch. It's like almost the safest thing you could possibly do, or even better, coffee. And there's a lot of great coffee shops in Nashville. And I would literally, if I wasn't writing, I was meeting people for coffee every single day. And, once you start to meet with other people, it doesn't have to be like the same, four people or however many number of people, but just continually inspiring yourself and filling yourself up with good ideas and, starting to think bigger, thinking new thoughts versus, I think we kind of can get stuck in a rut. And I know that was my main problem where I was just stuck in a rut. I was trying to do things on my own, but we all need some guidance, some support. And, doing it on your own is, fear is going to start talking and barking at you like a junkyard dog in your head. And you can really squash that fear by, figuring out, well, no one else is thinking exactly this way. I think a lot of this might just be lies, floating in my head.
Well, maybe this will help people as well, because I'm very introverted. I don't think I said that right. Introverted. I don't know if I'm the same, because in whatever you said, I've taken, that's the Briggs-Stratton, I think, or whatever it's called.
Myers-Briggs.
Myers-Briggs.
Yeah.
There you go. Briggs. Anyway, I think that's an engine or something, which I don't know a lot about those either. But I'm also very analytical as part of my introvertedness, and I did this. I didn't know I was doing this, but looking back, I realized I was doing testing, and I found, so if you're introverted, I found that groups of 4 or less, I was okay with. But as soon as that fifth person was added to the group, to the lunch, to the dinner, to the table, whatever, I would basically stop talking.
Yeah.
And that's still true today.
Yeah.
If I'm in a group of me and 3 other people, we're good. We're fine. Maybe that fifth one, depending on how comfortable I am with that person. But as soon as you add that 6th, I'm done. I will just shut up. I'll sit back. I'll go retreat into a corner, and it just doesn't work. But I love what you're saying about, going to coffee, going to grab a lunch, because you don't invite the whole team. You just invite some cool people, and changing it up, changing that reality, changing those people that you hang out with the most. And you'd probably be surprised in the ways that you start seeing the world differently.
Absolutely. Now, Eller, I have a question for you here. How have you kind of worked with that? Because I think I'm pretty close with you on that number, and I'll get really quiet if there's that many people. If it's, my number's probably more like 8, but I'll be real quiet because I'm kind of like, you know what? Maybe it's part of it. I just want, everybody else to have a chance to talk. And part of me is thinking, well, I won't even be able to have enough time to say what I really want to say. Maybe that's part of how I'm wired. But have you kind of figured that out? Is there something you're doing to really, move forward where you can just say, okay, I can be better in big groups?
I don't necessarily get on. Well, sometimes it's uncomfortable, but when it gets to the point where it's not with 4 people, it's almost like 4 one-on-one conversations. You can share equal parts, conversation, question, response, those kinds of things. But when it gets larger, inevitably there's going to be someone there that I disagree with, and instead of pointing out why they're wrong, I just shut up.
That's smart. That's smart.
I researched the heck out of stuff. Partly because I want to be prepared for conversations. I know a little bit about almost everything. We could strike up I don't watch NASCAR, but you and I could have a 5 or 10 minute conversation about what's going on in NASCAR right now, because I just researched that stuff, because I want to be able to have a conversation with anybody and relate to anybody. So the opposite of that is, once there's like 10 or more, I go, if I'm supposed to be in a position of authority, like if I'm supposed to be teaching something, or if I'm supposed to be leading a discussion, that extrovert part of me comes out, and
gotcha.
I kind of take over. But like a year and a half ago at New Media Expo, I was surrounded by hundreds and thousands of people, and it was different because the crowd was so huge. It was, you can almost get lost in it. Maybe that's my introvert
I get
blanket
that.
coming out.
I had same exact experience, and I went to the START conference. It was a couple years ago now in Nashville, and they had loud music and lots of people. And yeah, that was like the combination for me where, there is no quote unquote right or wrong way to do this, to network and to, talk with people. I was just curious if you had any tips, or, maybe this is something you and I both are, it's something you continually work on, where you can, get better at communicating with larger groups. But I think, it just takes experience too, right? And it's also a dynamic you can't really put your finger on at times, right?
Yeah, but at the same time, Jim, for me, I do my best anyway to not put myself into situations where I know I'm going to be uncomfortable. I don't go to bars or clubs or anything. I didn't do that in college either. Well, here's a perfect example. Whenever our friends had a housewarming party or it was a Christmas party or something, I sat in the corner because I wasn't not that I was not the focus, but I wasn't, the authority person. I wasn't leading the group. It wasn't my house. But when we had 30 people over to our house for 4th of July, I was a social butterfly. So my point is, it just depends on that situation. But also, if you're really relating to this part of the conversation today, just don't put yourself in those positions where it's going to be awkward and uncomfortable. That's not to say you shouldn't get out of your comfort zone. It's not to say you shouldn't invite a couple people, to go have a sandwich over lunch and get to know new people. I highly recommend that.
Yeah.
But don't go to these situations where...
Yeah, I get you.
Yes.
Absolutely, play to your strengths. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's true, because you're going to only frustrate yourself if you're trying to do things that are not, in your comfort zone at all, and no matter how much you keep working on it. Yeah.
Well, that, and you'll feel like a loser or you'll feel stupid. I've talked to a bunch of introverts about this, and because we're introverted, we are often thought to be kind of dumb because we don't blurt out answers. So people think since we're not blurting out answers, we don't know. And that's the opposite. But I have derailed us, and I apologize.
You're good. No, this is fun. This is fun because it's like I feel like we're both figuring out how we actually operate at the same time. It's interesting.
Yeah. The last thing I'll say before I want to get back to your journey, Jim, but is even though I'm very introverted and I like small groups like we've been talking about, sitting here in my office, I'm standing right now for the podcast, but standing here in the office, I do need human interaction.
Absolutely.
I have to get out.
Yep.
That's why I started doing coffee meetings on Thursdays. I haven't been to Toastmasters in a long time because I've been pretty busy, but that's why I started going to there. Just you need those human interactions. So
Absolutely.
Even where you are,
no,
make
absolutely.
sure you're getting out.
I am absolutely, and yeah, you're just your spouse and family doesn't count.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah, you have to get out and meet with people, and start to get in touch with others.
And there's one right now. And oddly enough, you can't rely on your spouse because then it becomes a very dependent relationship, and you don't want that either. So, as a side note, if your only interaction is waiting for your husband or wife to come home at 5:30 or 6, you're not doing your marriage any good either. But so, Jim, take us back to this journey. You've started meeting with all these new people. You started going to coffees and lunches.
Right.
And at this point in the story, you are still employed for someone else, and you are still in Nashville, right?
Yes, exactly. And basically, I just kept growing and growing as much as humanly possible, refining my message, failing a ton, continuing to meet with people, listening to podcasts and audiobooks, just filling my brain with as much information as humanly possible. And, trying to, figure out, where do I fall? What's my take on this? I think there's so much information out there. You can almost make that a form of resistance, a form of procrastination. And I think you can talk about doing the work a ton. And I think that was one of my biggest struggles early on. It was like I would only, focus on talking about writing versus actually doing the writing, and focus more on social media than actually doing something to talk about on social media. Which, we all fall into that at times because this is all uncharted territory. So I'm not passing judgment on anyone else who struggled with this. I'm calling myself out mainly. And there's so much experimentation. But over the course of time, I started to just continue to help encourage other entrepreneurs, others who were also, discontent with their job. And a lot of folks I know are doing the side hustle. And it was a really, really challenging, straining time in that, I was working a full-time job and I had my wife and kids, and I was still hustling, staying up typically late at night and working on the weekends. And eventually, you kind of come to the point where it's like you'll get a little burned out. You're like, okay, this is so much. I can't do this. I'm not, making the progress I want to make. That's all part of the path that you'll follow. That's part of the journey. And then finally, I just started to just pray about it. I'm a Christian, and I would pray about it. And I just felt this huge strain, like I was settling. I was settling for something that was not my destiny. And also that I was doing the right thing. I was, meant to, stay in that job that I wasn't a good fit. I didn't enjoy it. Until finally some doors closed and then some doors opened. I mean, we sold our house in Nashville and we just outgrew it. And it was just one of these situations where like, look, okay, let's go find another place. And we found a nice house, and we were talking about putting in a bid on it, and saying, hey, we'll pay you this number for it, and my heart just sank. And I truly feel it was God just yanking on me saying, you cannot do this. You are locking yourself in on something that you're not supposed to do. And right in that time frame, another job opportunity popped up in Nashville. But again, it was just another position that was just really, really similar to the one I was in. And I knew it was not a step forward. If anything, it was a sidestep. It was a temporary, fix of sorts, just, giving me a few months of getting used to it, a new environment. I knew I was just basically trying to buy time, trying to make things work when I knew in my heart it was time to move on. So we moved. Go ahead.
Can we talk about some time management for a minute? Because I know we're both married. We don't, Ashley and I don't have any kids. Mm-hmm. You guys have at least one.
Two now.
You have two.
Yeah, two now.
And we were just talking before we started recording, all that juicy stuff that the audience doesn't get to hear. We're talking about time management and being a husband and a father. And I've got somebody in mind. One of the guys in my mastermind, mm-hmm. He's got a salaried job, right, and they are working him like a dog. And he's young. I think he's in his mid-20s, and he hasn't. I don't know if this is his first job after college, mm-hmm.
But
he hasn't been beaten over the head long enough like I was. I don't know if that's a good analogy or not, but how do you're working 80 hours a week,
wow,
or 60 hours a week, whatever it is. You're almost 7 days a week too,
sure,
getting called in on the weekends, whatever. Ugh. How do you find the time to do something on the side? How do you find time to blog?
Yeah.
And then how do you say to the boss, enough is enough? I've got to spend time with my family.
Sure.
And how do you do that?
Well, I think you're actually asking a couple questions, Ellery. I'll try to break them down because there's so much going on. We're busy. You're overwhelmed. You're fatigued. I think go for the easy win. Go for the easy win. And by that, I mean, if you're commuting, you listen to podcasts, you listen to audiobooks, you go for the easy wins. You can fit, into your life some of these things, no matter how busy you are. You can use like Dragon Dictation if you have a smartphone, and talk into that, just get your thoughts out. And it's not perfect at all. I mean, I'll be honest, it's not perfect. But it gets your text, voice and turns it into text, and then just email yourself. You'll have to spend some time editing that. No big deal, though.
But you got to edit anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I always say.
Or just use your voice memo app if you have like a voice recorder on your phone, and just empty out your thoughts, because little actions add up. They really truly do. I can, vouch for this firsthand, where, just finding those little things that help fulfill you can help you hang on. Now, the 80 hours a week, when you're working insane amounts of time, I would just go directly to the boss and be like, look, I would just tell him, say, look, I am not working, better. I'm just working longer. And honestly, it's just everything's taking more time because I'm so strained. And there's a lot of documentation to prove this, because, your mental energy is finite. And when you hit that point of no return, diminishing returns, if anything. So I would just go to the boss and be like, look, and, just have a heart to heart with them, because there's got to be a better way. Even if it means working from home to cut into the commute one day a week, or every other, one day every other week. There's got to be some give, because the entire workforce has changed so much. I don't see anyone ever sticking around in a position like that, where you're working insane amounts of time and working on the weekends for a long sustained period. Now, for, tax season, if you're an accountant or something like that, that's a limited, busy season. But, just talk to your boss and be direct. And just following up my first thought with going for easy wins, go for your lunch hour. If you cannot even get a lunch hour from, your job, and you're working that many hours, you really have to talk to them. You have to be able to get breaks. Otherwise, you're not going to be doing good work by default.
And it's illegal to not let you have a lunch hour.
Exactly.
So.
There you go. I'm sure quite a few places probably try that, or encourage you to eat at your desk. But, worst case possible scenario, 15 minutes of doing something you love can still change your life. 15 minutes a day, times 5 days, that sounds like almost an hour and a half right there. So even if it's, 15 minutes, something as small as that, you can still, change your life. And a lot of this starts too with your attitude. If you think like you're defeated and you make excuses, you're going to feel terrible. You're going to blame everybody else. But if
it's that victim mentality, they're making me work this much. They're keeping me from doing this.
Exactly. And I felt that way.
I allow it.
I felt that way directly. I mean, I felt in some ways like, okay, this is my prison sentence. And it sounds so extreme to say it out loud now, but that's how I felt. And the problem could be, and in many cases, if you're doing all this, you're probably depressed. You're probably not, firing on all your cylinders, and you're not going to feel well. So, maybe the first step really could be just going for walks, getting a little exercise, eating a little better. Anything you can do just to help yourself feel better, I think can have that, domino effect, that chain reaction.
Very good point. I know I'm a much happier person now that I'm out of a negative environment. But so you were, again, coffee and lunch.
Yep.
You had sold the house. You were about to put down a bid, and you got this feeling that hey, this isn't what God wants me to do.
Yeah.
What's next?
And it wasn't just that one feeling. It was like it's been building toward this all along. And my wife started not, and my wife and I, we just kept talking. One of the most important things you can ever do if you're discontent is, talk to your spouse. Don't act like you're alone and hold it inside. That was my big fail. Why I think I felt so terrible and had a breakdown. I kept everything inside and just internalized everything. So I kept talking to my wife, and we just kept talking and talking and just, continually talking and praying. And we just started to realize, like, look, this isn't the right fit for us. There's a lot of pros, but there's a lot of cons. And I truly feel that, if you feel really stuck, your spouse wants you to be happy. You have to believe that. And also, too, I think, you have to think God wants you to be happy. You don't want, to have this mindset of everybody's out to get you, or you're, always doing time and this is just, what you deserve. So I simply, it was just that progression there where it just continued to, um, naturally roll. It wasn't even so much what I was doing as much as what I'd started 4 years ago. And I was just trying to be, obedient and respond to it. And I had a job lined up as a virtual assistant, as like, okay, like, all right, well, what if I could just transition here? And I was planning on becoming a virtual assistant to kind of, have that be my jumping from one job, going to another, because that's the advice you always, always hear. And the more I even talked with my wife about that, we decided that even that job wasn't the right fit. It was a step in the wrong direction. And that was one of the most powerful moments, I think, in my life, where my wife's like, look, I support you. I get it. I know you want to provide income, but if you know in your heart this is the wrong move, you have to trust your gut. And that was like, I went from the, most secure, stable environment in that government job, Ellery, to, complete uncharted territory, like total risk, where I didn't know what I was doing. I was kind of like, okay, well, all right, well, you know what? I have to trust my faith in God and, honestly, to be okay with the uncertainty. And that's a
Yeah.
big shift. And I mean, I have 2 kids. I was scared to death and fear was just barking at me. And I thought, I am not going to be able to afford insurance. I'm a failure as a parent, as a husband, etc. But all of that actually worked out really well. I mean, it was amazing when so much of this was fear just holding me back. I was always afraid to look into the, pricing insurance for a self-employed, family. But when I looked into it, it's like, oh, well, we qualify for this subsidy. And it actually was only like a couple $100 a month for insurance. And it was not as good as what I had before, but it wasn't bad. And a lot of that is just so fear-based. And I think that was when, like, the mountain I always thought I was afraid of climbing, because I kept hearing all of these horror stories. And, a lot of this fear, if you have, I mean, yes, you have to work like crazy, you have to hustle like crazy. But if you're being, pulled in a specific direction and that's the right path to take, you're going to have to do it at some point. And that's pretty much what I came to.
And I'm assuming Columbus or the Ohio area is where you were from initially?
My wife's family, actually. I'm from northern Ohio.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
my wife's family. We're staying with my wife's family right now, just kind of in this transition phase, and it's been amazing. I mean, I could not have dreamed how all this would have worked out. Yes, it's been crazy at times. I mean, life is crazy by default, right? But
Yeah.
it's worked out extremely well. And now we're looking at, well, where do we want to settle down? Where do we want to find a place, to stay a little more long term?
So where does the blog come in on all of this? Because so many people, and I talked to Carrie Oberbrunner about this, and I've referenced that conversation a half dozen times at least. We want to make these changes like we would walk into a room and make a light switch. We are over here on the left, and we are successful working at the government job or whatever, and we want to be able to go in, flip a switch. That was me snapping, if anybody heard that.
Okay.
That was and make this immediate change to, hey, I've got this successful business. I'm bringing in revenue. I've got clients. I've got all of this stuff. I know you've been blogging since I don't know how long. How does that fit in? How does that play into this transition? Because you also wrote a book,
right,
which probably wouldn't have happened if you hadn't started the blog, and you probably wouldn't be here where you are if you hadn't, done some of these other things along the way. How does that the online Jim Woods
absolutely love to tie
fit
that in? Well, the blog, it's funny. It all started out as Unknown Jim. I really didn't know what the heck I was doing, and I was okay with being unknown. And I kind of stole a little bit from my friend John Acuff. He had one called Prodigal John. And I was like, okay, Unknown Jim. Sure. Okay. I'll do that. Whatever. And I was okay with being completely unknown. I didn't know I was creative. I was like convinced that I wasn't. And that was just a process of almost a diary. It wasn't it's almost the opposite of what I would recommend for some writers today because I just did a lot of this on my own without help. Now I'm like, look, get help and you will speed up the process immensely. But I was just documenting and thinking big and dreaming big. And then I transitioned to jimwoodswrites.com. I think that was May, like 2 years ago, something like that. So, and it was a process. And I've started writing a few books. I like out of the gate. I mean, I was ready to write a book. I'll be honest, Ellery, it was the funniest thing. I felt inspired. I had something to say, but I didn't know how to do the whole book. I would get stuck and I would get in the middle where it gets sticky and extra challenging, and I would just stop. And then I would jump ship and go start another book. And I had this terrible habit of, starting stuff and never finishing it. And finally, a friend called me out on it. And I'm like, ouch, that just hurts. But okay, I don't know any better. I'm not sure how to do this, really. It's just uncharted territory. Until finally, I reached out and I talked to my friend Eric Fisher. And I had this idea for a productivity book that it was just huge in scope. I mean, it was like change your life, change your, family, change the world. It was productivity, but it was so extreme. It was a huge dream of mine. And I started writing it and I talked to Eric Fisher. This was May of 2013. And okay. I called him up and he was in town in Nashville. That was the big perk. Everybody came to Nashville. And he was speaking at a podcast conference the next day. And he's like, yeah, this sounds interesting. Let's talk about it. Yeah. And we just started talking and I told him what I've got, what I'm doing, what I want it to look like. And he said, dude, let's work together on this. Let's start, working on this more. And Eric was the final shove I needed to finish a book. He was very important. He was like that final, piece of accountability and helping, talk things through. And I truly, in some ways, Eric was like my coach, really. And he has all this experience too with productivity. His show is great. And he was like the final piece there. And I finished a book. And that book came out and it was a life changer for me because the book brought in income from my writing.
Which is a cool win, isn't it?
Oh, it's unreal because my writing never made much at all. I always owed more than I would make from writing because of blogging. You go to conferences and you're buying themes and hosting and all those little, things in the background that add up. Well, not many people actually make money off their blog. And I'm not trying to sound anti-blog. I'm pro-blog. But not many people actually make, income off their blog because most people, it's like they're driving you to something else. It might be a book or services or something else. But just writing blog posts, it's like you're not going to it's not going to give you the income that you probably want as a writer. Now,
and that's okay.
Yeah, and that's fine.
Because
absolutely.
you have to, and I thought I agree with you. I blogged just for the sake of blogging for a long time, and something finally clicked. It was not Noah Kagan. It was one of the Fizzle guys, Corbett. It was Corbett Barr who said, lead with the product, or at least have something that you can direct people to, because you do have to have something that
Absolutely.
generates money. I mean, that's the New York Times is basically thousands of blog posts folded into paper, exactly. But they make money. I mean, let's say, for example, we charged what the New York Times charges. We would make like $4 a month.
Right.
But they make their money because they scale, and we're not doing that. And anyway, I agree that everyone should blog, but it's not that immediate income
Right,
generator
it's not.
unless you set
It's
up.
not. And blogging, honestly, I felt it's easy to fall amongst all the other bloggers out there. I mean, standing out as a blogger is really, really hard to do. I mean,
Yeah.
let's face it, that's the number one challenge most bloggers face.
And stick to
Oh
itiveness. I
yeah,
think people give up too
oh yeah,
fast.
in that being, avoiding burnout, or what do you do when you face setbacks and all of that. But writing a book completely changed my life. I mean, it literally was something in the background that helped establish me, as a writer. And all of a sudden I have new connections and new opportunities. And I didn't really mention it earlier in my story, but some freelance opportunities kind of just popped up, through people I had met, through folks who have read my books. And it's like it's a momentum thing. And there's nothing out there in the world like having a book, especially a physical book, and like giving that away. If you go to a conference and give people a book, they're like, whoa, that's a lot better than just a little business card that gets easily misplaced. Giving a book to someone is like, especially if you sign it to them personally. That's a really cool gift versus, hey, how's it going? Hey, yeah, okay. No, like, hey, you know what? I'd love to give you this. And, not saying you give away a book to everybody you meet. You don't want to be that guy. But if you feel you can help somebody out, absolutely. I'm all about that. And basically the books were so important for me. Our house was underwater. Like, it was about $30,000. That was part of my whole, feeling trapped when our house was, worth $30,000 less than we owed.
And you're talking about
mortgage.
literal water because Nashville flooded, right?
Not that literal water. We did not flood,
Okay.
but the mortgage was $30,000 more than the house was worth. So I felt
Okay.
even more trapped. Like, okay, I am just stuck here, and I have all this weight on my shoulders. Well, the books, the income from the books, and also doing a refinancing, over time, it all adds up. I would apply my, book income toward the mortgage. And literally, the fact we were able to, break even on our house was in some ways, in my mind, it feels like a miracle. My pay sure didn't go up at all, other than my book income. My pay was as frozen as Elsa's ice castle, in my government gigs. So
I'm sure that's a Frozen
yes,
reference.
it was very, very frozen. So yeah, it was kind of a game changer for me. And that's honestly, Ellery, this is why my last project has been, helping people write ebooks and write books, like from start to finish. It's something I'm
Yeah.
passionate about because I know it can change lives. And honestly, that's how I did my career transition. I have 15 years of accounting experience, and I went and became a writer. I mean, it sounds insane to say it out loud. But the books were a massive part of my transition.
So yeah, I would have to echo that. The first real big book that I published, it was a lot of videos and stuff, was How to Start Your Professional Podcast for $200 or less.
Yeah.
And that was some really cool exposure. I don't know if I really leveraged it into some other opportunities like some other people have, but I can attest, and mine was never physical, but I would love to have one of those someday. But having a book, being able to go to like author or Amazon.com/Ellery Wells or /author/Ellery, that's kind of cool. But now you said because of the impact a book has had on you, and I would agree it opens doors and gives you a sense of credibility, especially when you have a physical book. You have decided to help authors get started, help bloggers transition into book writers and those kinds of things, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So tell us what that has evolved into, what you're working on now, how you are leveraging that as part of your business,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
all that stuff.
Absolutely. Well, I also love coaching. It's just my heart. It's just I love teaching other people. I love helping people get unstuck if they're in remotely any place like I have been. Because there's nothing more frustrating than having a book that's like a third of the way done, or even worse would be like half done. You can look at it as half completed or half, unfinished. And I just applied everything I've learned from the entire process, all of the challenges I've faced, and starting as simple as the brainstorming phase, because I think a lot of entrepreneurs and bloggers too, I mean, I think we have a lot of ideas. Sometimes figuring out a good idea to write a book on, that can be like the paralyzing moment.
Yeah.
Or, you know, working with an editor. Oh my gosh, that sounds a lot like English class with, the teachers and the red pens. That sounds a little scary, right? Well, I try to take away all the fear from that because I've done it a few times. Yeah, it's gonna
So you use a green pen then.
exactly use a purple pen, a pink pen, anything but red. But I tried to break it down, and I've even compiled some of my all-time favorite editors, cover designers. I just wanted to make this course the ultimate excuse remover, to sharing your story with the world. Because I think everybody has a story to share. And if the statistics are right and 4 out of 5 people want to write a book, 4 out of 5 people, that's 80%. But how many people actually do this? How many people write books? Not many. Not many
Probably
at
one
all.
in 1,000.
It's really low. I mean, there's more with, the self-publishing and Amazon, but it's still really low, compared to blog posts. It's not even close. And I think that books last longer. I really do. I think blog posts, I think they're a great exercise. I think they're almost in some senses the appetizer, but you're not going to want just that for long. If you want to be a writer and if you want to spread a message, you have to write a book at some point. And, I think it's scary at first for some people, especially like this whole finding an editor and finding a good cover designer and then, formatting these books for Amazon. And, well, what do you sell it? And what do you do? What's a marketing plan? What's a strategy there? Well, my course really focuses on breaking everything down step by step. And I think a lot of us are afraid to sell. I think we're afraid to be total marketers. So my entire take on it is share. I believe that good stories, we like to share those. I'm not trying to create a bunch of aggressive salesmen. I think that most introverts, especially, and especially authors and writers, they're kind of like, we're apprehensive at first, at least. And it's like, hey, I wrote this book, please go buy it. And that's the entire marketing strategy. But I think there's a lot better way to do that. I think that we can do a much better job by, focusing on the story. Let the story do the selling for you. Let the story, spread itself and spread the message versus, acting like you have to convince people, to buy your book. The book should be, have a good story to it as is, and it should be engaging. You should write it in a way that's engaging versus, trying to convince people to buy it when they're like, I don't think I'm interested. I don't think that works very well. So I tried to just remove every obstacle that you could possibly have to writing a book. Even the time management. I think that you hit on this a little bit earlier, Ellery, where, time management, we all have different schedules. I didn't want to create a course that says write a book in 90 days or write a book in 6 months. I think, write it on whatever, margin you have. Write it if you only have that, 20 minutes a day to write. I think you probably have more time than that, but starting out, you know what I'm saying? Starting out, dive in, just 20 minutes. I'm not going to judge you. There's no wrong way to write a book other than just to not do it,
So what's that first step, that first tip, or the best tip that you can give for that person who's like, hey, I'm gonna start a book, maybe?
Yeah, yeah.
What do you tell that person? What do they get when they sign up for that course?
Well,
What's lesson one?
lesson one is brainstorming. And I think this is a challenge because a lot of us don't take the time to really go through the process. I recommend several different, approaches. I don't think there's one way to brainstorm. It can be as simple as, opening up a word processor, document and just typing a bunch of words and saying, okay, this is an idea, this is a start. Or, busting out some sticky notes and writing a word on each note. And, you can sort those around, or just a mind map, which is nice because then you're not forced by any kind of order. So I would say just, take the ideas you have, do this activity like before bedtime, and then just let your brain continue to, sort it out for you. Come to it the next morning and look at it, with your coffee in hand or breakfast. And, it might make a whole lot more sense to you the next morning versus trying to, figure out your entire book in one evening.
Well, I know Pat Flynn's a big fan of the Post-it note method, color coding those.
Absolutely.
And I, just because I know, one of the few books that I've read multiple times is Think and Grow Rich. And one of the things Napoleon Hill says in there is he talks a lot about feeding your subconscious and letting your subconscious go to work, which is, it doesn't sleep. You do, but your subconscious doesn't. So asking yourself those questions, presenting your subconscious with problems and letting it, that's where dreams come from. In case anybody thinks this sounds a little bit weird, that's your brain's trying to digest the crap you've thrown into it, or the good stuff that you've thrown into it during the day. And if you can present your subconscious mind with these problems and ask for a solution, I do this all the time. I will go to bed with a question on my mind, and usually either I forget about it completely or I come back and I have made progress somehow to find the way through it. Where can we find more information about your course? I know if you're at your computer right now, go to jimwoodswrites.com. That's Jim's blog where he's been writing all these cool stuff, and where I love to go and read what Jim has to say. Where can we find more info specifically about this course?
The course is writepublishshare.com. writepublishshare.com. And just for your listeners, Ellery, I would like to offer a code for $50 off if they would like to, sign up for this course.
Sure.
The code for that is just WPS and then the word friend, no space. So just WPS friend will save you $50 off of each level. So awesome. Also one thing I didn't mention though, I'm trying to keep this course as hands-on as possible. If you need help, if you have questions, I've created a great Facebook group to go with it, because writing a book completely on your own, I think, is one of the hardest things to do in the world. Without any support, anyone to give you, feedback or advice, or, just to help, give you an outside perspective. So a lot of this is, there's the second level with the course. It comes with 2 coaching sessions to kind of break this down, because I think sometimes even in the brainstorming phase, you really want to talk with someone else and get some good conversation going. You can get a whole book out of it, from one great session. If you just can figure out the beginning, middle, and end for your book, you can kind of work backwards from there. And it's funny how just that communication and interaction can, almost write your story for you, as far as, when you're in that brainstorming phase.
Yeah, that's awesome. So we'll put a link to the show notes along with the WPS friend promo code. I guess once you go to sign up, there will be a spot to add that at the cart or something. Oh, I see it right there. Discount code and all that stuff. So WPS friend, which is writepublishshare.com. Jim, a couple quick questions for you.
Sure.
What was the last movie you saw?
Oh, shoot. I'm going to say...
Hopefully it wasn't Frozen for the 7th time.
70th. Well, I think it was Born Identity. Yeah, Born Identity.
Like the OG with
Oh,
from
the
like,
old one. Yeah, the really, really old
wow.
one.
Why were you watching? I mean, not that that's a bad movie, but why what brought you to that one?
I I like the beginning. And honestly, I've been leaning more toward fiction. I've got a novel kind of in the works right now, and I love the beginning. I love the aspect where your main character wakes up with that amnesia in the middle of the water, and I think I like that part. I think I'm gonna see if I can implement that in some other cool ways in the story.
So research.
Yeah, it really is. I'm pretty analytical that way.
Well, that I too have a fiction book that I started writing in 2009 after I'd gotten laid off from IBM. I was reading a lot of Vince Flynn, a lot of Brad Thor, and these spy novels and
Nice.
kind of these drama stuff. And I was like, man, if they can do it, I can do it too. And as weird as that may sound, that's probably how a lot of people get started.
That's the
But
truth. Absolutely.
I got, I don't know, a handful of chapters and a few dozen pages into it, and it was a really interesting story. So, but it's kind of cool when you work for yourself, or when you want to write a book, you can use all these cool things as excuses, or use them as research.
That's right. Yeah, no, actually that's the big challenge. I'm very visual, and limiting that, because I love stories. I just love stories so much, and I need to, be very aware of that. And like when I start writing fiction, it's like that movie is going in my head, or that show is going in my head. So I need to almost get into that mindset where, honestly, I could pretty much watch something and then say, "Oh, that's a good idea," and then it's still going on in the background, but I'm just writing frantically on my notepad.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Jim, my final question for you before we get into where we can find you and connect and all those things is, if someone is in the position you were a year ago, where they don't necessarily hate their job. I was really uncomfortable, and I just didn't like it.
Hmm.
But not everybody is to that extreme
Hmm.
point. If they're kind of in this limbo, this lukewarm water of,
Ooh,
they don't hate it,
yeah.
but they don't love it either. What's one tip or a piece of advice that you can give that person who's just in this purgatory, is a good word too, this
Oh,
in
that's
between,
hard.
this limbo?
Yeah.
What would you tell that person?
I don't know if there's anything you can tell that person, to be completely blunt with you, Ellery, because I think they'll have to figure it out themselves. I think that you have to be uncomfortable enough to embrace change. And change is so hard at first. Um, if you're kind of in limbo and you're just very lukewarm about your job and just kind of not really feeling anything, it's hard. You don't know any better. There is no other reference. So I would, a lot of it comes back to, who do you surround yourself with? If you're surrounded with a bunch of other folks who feel the exact same way, uh, you are stuck. I don't, until you talk to some people who are really excited and passionate and doing things that make you go, wow. I don't think you can get unstuck at that point, to be completely honest. I wish I could say, yeah, just go do this and you'll get unstuck, but you're you don't know any better. You have no frame of reference. And this is totally me, a few years ago, like about 5 years ago, this is totally me, where you're just kind of going through the motions, and
Yeah.
you deserve more than that. You deserve much more than going through the motions. Um,
That is so perfect, Jim. And I used the lukewarm reference. I think you might have picked up on that, but where if you're just in this kind of lukewarm, I like it. If you're in this pool of water and it's just kind of not hot, not cold, and the other people that you hang out with are in this lukewarm water, no one's gonna ever tell you that there's the ice bath or the nice hot tub over there waiting for you, and you do kind of have to figure it out on your own. And it's like the dog that's laying on the front porch on a nail.
mhm.
He's not happy. He's kind of miserable, but not miserable enough to do anything about it, to get up and move. And so I love that advice. I think a lot of people will resonate with that. I know I do. I was right there before it started getting worse, and I know there are people that I used to be on a team with who are still being told by management it's going to get better, and it hasn't. And even though you may not be as disenchanted with work like I was, and some people are out there, it's just not a good fit anymore, and maybe a change is in the works for you. So, Jim, where can we connect with you? Of course, we mentioned jimwoodswrites.com. We mentioned Write, Share, Publish, Share.
Yeah,
we got to get the order right, publishshare.com. Where can we connect with you?
Those are the main two sites. I'm also on Twitter, Jim Woods Writes. I'd love to connect with everyone I possibly can there. I love stories, and I really want you, the listener, to live a better story. I know that's kind of what Ellery is doing as well. I mean, it's all about helping you, become the best version of you.
Awesome. And I do my very best to help people get all those obstacles out of the way like you're doing with the writing. So, Jim, thanks for coming on the show today. Thanks for sharing your story, how you moved from Nashville up to the middle of nowhere, because if it's not Texas, California, or New York, people who don't live here don't know where it is. So,
alrighty then. No, thank you, Ellery. I really appreciate it. This has been a blast.
And again, thank you, Jim, and I wish you all the best.
You too.
Be sure you check out Jim's course, Write, Publish, Share, at writepublishshare.com. And if you use that promo code WPS friend, you can save $50 off of that. I can tell you that having a book will do wonders. And if it's true that everybody has a book in them, or most people want to start a book, this is a great way to do that, because Jim will teach you exactly how to do that. I've got another book in me. I think I've mentioned it a couple times on the show that back in 2008, when I got laid off from IBM, I started a fiction book. And a lot lately, I have been thinking about finishing that, because I've been reading On Writing by Stephen King, and he's giving me tips about how to write better fiction. And I don't write a lot of fiction these days, but that's something that's been on my mind, as well as a book that I started, I think, in 2012, 2013, about leadership. And I don't talk a whole lot about leadership anymore, but I think that book, saying that is always a fun phrase. I think that book will turn into maybe more of a biography or something. I'm not sure, but if you have a book in you and you want to write, you want to tell your story, definitely check out writepublishshare.com. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, keep in mind that today's students are tomorrow's best business cards. So have a wonderful day. Shoot me an email, Ellery@ElleryWells.com. I'd love to hear from you. Love to hear about what you are working on, what you're up to these days. And I've got another project that you might be interested in. Just a quick teaser for that. If you want to start a mastermind, and a lot of people that I know have that on their agenda. They want to lead them. They want to be parts of them, but they don't know exactly what to do. And I'm working on a project that will help people do that, help answer those questions that people like you have about starting masterminds. So stay tuned for that. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Empowered Podcast. I'm your host, Ellery Wells. Find me over at empoweredpodcast.com or ElleryWells.com. Whether you're on the treadmill or on the road, have an awesome day.